At 8:12 on a gray Monday morning, Kate Holloway was handed a termination letter for doing something she believed would save her career. The envelope was thin. The paper inside was colder than the glass walls around her. She stood in a conference room on the 19th floor of Mercer Point Solutions, a fast-growing consulting firm in Manhattan, and read the same sentence 3 times before it made sense. Violation of workplace confidentiality and unauthorized recording of internal conversations. Across from her, human resources sat perfectly still, hands folded, faces neutral in the polished way only corporate people ever seem to master. But the one face Kate couldn't stop looking at was John Mercer's, 35 years old. Director of Operations, expensive watch, sleeves rolled to the forearms, calm voice. The kind of man who could enter a room and make panic sound reasonable. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier. He looked disappointed, and somehow, that hurt more. 3 days earlier, Kate had walked into that same room with what she thought was proof. One audio file, 47 minutes long, containing the conversation that could expose everything. The pressure, the falsified numbers, the quiet threats wrapped in polite language. She thought truth, once heard, would force the company to act. Instead, truth had turned around and bitten her first. By noon, attorneys would be discussing whether the recording itself was lawful. By nightfall, Kate would learn something worse than losing a job. Sometimes the truth is not what destroys you. Sometimes it's the way you prove it. Kate was 24, smart in the way that made older executives underestimate her. She didn't dominate rooms. She listened, noticed, remembered. Fresh out of graduate school, she had joined Mercer Point believing it was the kind of place ambitious people used to build serious careers. The company advised retailers and logistics firms on labor efficiency, staffing models, and cost controls. On paper, it was modern, clean, disciplined. Inside, it ran on fear, nothing dramatic at first. No shouting, no broken furniture, no villain with a cruel smile. That would have made things simpler. Mercer Point was more sophisticated than that. It rewarded silence, dressed pressure as professionalism, and trained people to confuse exhaustion with loyalty. Kate worked on the payroll analysis team, a quiet department buried beneath operations. Her job was to review timekeeping reports, overtime patterns, and productivity metrics for client accounts. She was good at it. Too good. Maybe. She saw irregularities sooner than most people did. The first time she noticed the numbers didn't add up, she thought it was a mistake. A regional client in New Jersey had unusually low overtime costs compared to output volume. The staffing levels didn't match. Neither did the schedules. Kate ran the spreadsheet twice. Then 3 times. She found whole blocks of labor hours shifted into categories that made them disappear from the weekly overage reports. It looked cleaner on paper, impossible in real life. She brought it to her immediate supervisor, who barely glanced at the file before telling her not to overcomplicate operational adjustments. That phrase bothered her. So did his eyes when he said it. Not annoyed, nervous. A week later, she found a second account with the same pattern. Then a third. What unsettled her most wasn't the manipulation itself. It was how normal everyone acted around it. At first, John Mercer was the exception. He had a reputation at the company. Demanding. Yes, but sharp. Fair. If he respected you. He was one of the few executives who actually knew people's names below the director level. When he stopped by Kate's desk one evening after most of the floor had emptied, she assumed she was in trouble. Instead, he asked, "You're the one reviewing the Atlantic freight accounts, right?" Kate nodded. "I've heard you're thorough." There was something tired in his face that didn't belong to the polished version of him everyone saw in meetings. He leaned one hand against the cubicle wall and lowered his voice. "Be careful with what you put in email." That was all he said. Then he walked away. For the next 2 weeks, Kate watched him more closely. The controlled voice, the long pauses in meetings, the way he sometimes started to object, then stopped. It was subtle, but once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. John Mercer wasn't running the machine. He was trapped in it, The real pressure came from above him, from the chief financial officer, Daniel Rourke, a man who never raised his voice because he never had to. He liked to talk about margin discipline and narrative control. He liked private meetings, unrecorded calls, soft smiles. When numbers improved, he praised leadership. When anything looked exposed, he reminded people how fragile careers could be. Then Friday happened. Kate was asked to join a closed-door alignment review with John and 2 senior managers. No agenda, no notes sent in advance. The room was too warm. Someone had lowered the blinds halfway, and the city outside looked like it had been erased in gray pencil. John stood near the screen at the front. The others remained seated. On the monitor were labor reports from 3 client accounts Kate had flagged. John did not sit down. He looked at the numbers, then at her. "We need these classifications adjusted before external review," he said. Kate felt the first drop in her stomach. Adjusted how? One of the senior managers answered for him. "Moved into deferred productivity support." "That doesn't describe the labor," Kate said. "It describes the outcome," the manager replied. Kate glanced at John. He said nothing. The room grew still. She had spent her whole life believing that, at crucial moments, wrongdoing announced itself clearly. That there would be some line no decent person could cross without visibly becoming the villain. But real life was uglier than that. Real life came in tailored shirts and reasonable tones. Kate asked, "Are you telling me to alter records before an audit?" No one answered directly. The senior manager simply said, "I'm telling you to be a team player." John looked at her then, really looked at her, and for one strange second, she thought he was about to stop the meeting. Instead, he said quietly, "We all need to be practical." That sentence stayed with her all weekend. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded like surrender. On Sunday night, Kate sat in her apartment in Astoria with her laptop, the skyline dim beyond the window, replaying every expression in that room. Her heart kept returning to the same thought. If they denied it later, she had nothing. No witness willing to speak. No clean paper trail. No safety. Only their word against hers. She knew enough to be cautious. She searched the law, called a legal aid hotline, read late into the night. In New York, if you are part of the conversation, one party's consent is often enough to record it. That did not mean the company would like it. It did not mean there would be no consequences. But it meant the act itself might not be the crime they would want her to believe it was. Monday morning, she put her phone in her blazer pocket and hit record before walking into John's office. He looked exhausted, as though sleep had become an administrative inconvenience. The office behind him was all glass and order. Framed degree, spotless desk, skyline view. "Close the door," he said. Kate sat. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then John exhaled and rubbed a hand across his jaw. "You shouldn't have challenged that meeting the way you did. Because I was wrong? Because you were visible?" That answer startled her. John stepped away from the window. "You think this place rewards honesty? It rewards timing. And right now, timing is terrible." Kate held his gaze. "Were those records false?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "If you push this, they will isolate you. They'll call you unstable, difficult, disloyal. They'll say you misunderstood an operational review." "Did I?" Another silence. Then, more quietly than before, John said, "There are conversations in this building. People survive by forgetting." Kate could hear her own breathing. "I'm not asking what people survive. I'm asking what's true." His face changed then. Not much. Just enough. And in that tiny fracture, she understood him. John Mercer had crossed too many lines too slowly to remember where the first one was. When he finally spoke, his words came measured, almost careful enough to sound kind. The classifications were pushed because the quarter had to close clean. There's pressure from investors. The client renewals matter. If the reports look unstable, people lose accounts, bonuses, jobs. Kate said, "So the numbers were manipulated." John closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them again. "Yes." The room went silent. Her pulse pounded so hard she thought he might hear it through the desk. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. "But if you repeat that outside this room, they won't come for me first. They'll come for you." She left his office shaking. For 2 hours, she did nothing. She opened files, closed them, stared at a spreadsheet without seeing a single cell. Around her, keyboards clicked, and phones buzzed, and people laughed at low volume near the coffee station, as though the whole building had agreed to protect itself with normalcy. By mid-afternoon, she made her choice. Not alone. She went first to Elena from payroll, then Marcus from staffing, 2 employees who had privately complained for months that labor adjustments were being used to conceal overtime exposure and push blame downward. They were terrified. But when Kate described what John had said, Marcus's expression hardened. "So it's not just bad management," he said. "It's deliberate." That mattered, because now this was no longer only Kate's fear or Kate's grievance. It was workers talking together about workplace conditions, pay practices, and possible misconduct that affected all of them. She didn't know whether the law would protect every step she took, but she knew silence would protect nothing. Together, they went to Human Resources. Kate played the recording. No one interrupted. No one gasped. No one looked shocked. That should have warned her. The HR director simply asked for a copy, thanked them for bringing concerns forward, and ended the meeting in under 12 minutes. By 6 o'clock, Marcus texted that his system access had been restricted. By 7, Elena's manager had rescheduled her upcoming promotion review indefinitely. By 8:12 the next morning, Kate was in the glass conference room, holding the termination letter. The HR director recited policy in a smooth voice. Unauthorized recording. Breach of confidentiality. Erosion of trust. Immediate separation. Kate listened, then turned to John. "Did you tell them to do this?" He said nothing. That silence was answer enough. She should have walked out quietly. Instead, she said, "You admitted it." The HR director in. "This meeting is not for debate." Kate's hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You can call it policy. You can call it culture. You can call it whatever helps you sleep. But the recording exists." For the first time, one of the executives at the table looked unsettled. Not because of what she said. Because she sounded unafraid. The story might have ended there. One employee fired. One warning sent to everyone else. But Mercer Point made a mistake, common to powerful people. They assumed fear was permanent. Kate found an employment attorney by noon. Not a television lawyer. Not dramatic. Just a precise woman in Lower Manhattan who listened without interrupting. Then asked 3 questions Kate had not expected. "Were you part of the recorded conversation?" "Yes." "Did anyone instruct you to commit a crime with the recording?" "No." "Did coworkers join you in raising concerns about pay practices and company conduct?" "Yes." The attorney leaned back slightly. Then their confidence may be larger than their legal position. She explained carefully. Federal law often permits recording when one party consents. New York generally does too. That did not erase company policy. It did not guarantee Kate would win every claim. But it meant the company could not simply call her a criminal and be done with it. And if retaliation touched employees acting together over workplace conditions, the company might have another problem entirely. For the first time in 24 hours, Kate could breathe. Then came the twist she never saw coming. 2 days later, John called her from a private number. She nearly let it ring out. Instead, she answered. His voice sounded nothing like it had in the office. No polish. No distance. Just fatigue stripped bare. "They're preparing to blame all of it on me," he said. Kate stared at the wall of her apartment. "You helped them." "I know." "Then why are you calling?" A pause. "Because I was supposed to keep you scared long enough for them to clean the files." Kate closed her eyes. He continued. "I didn't know they were going to fire you that fast. And I didn't realize how far Rourke had already gone." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Now you want sympathy." "No," John said. "I want to tell the truth before they bury it under procedure." He met her and her attorney the next morning. Without the office around him, John looked older than 35. Not in his face, in his posture, in the way regret settles into the body before it reaches language. He brought printouts, internal directives, revised spreadsheets, and 2 email chains that connected the manipulations to the chief financial officer's office. He admitted his role. He admitted he had repeated pressure downward, because he believed resistance would end his career. He admitted that when Kate challenged him, part of him wanted her to back down because she was still close enough to innocence to make him ashamed. The complaint that followed was not simple, and it was not quick. Mercer Point denied wrongdoing, then softened, then blamed miscommunication, then blamed John, then claimed policy violations justified every action taken. But once regulators began asking questions, and outside counsel started using words like retaliation, wage exposure, and spoliation risk, the company's certainty began to crack. The settlement came months later, quiet and expensive. Kate did not get her old job back. She did not want it. Marcus and Elena received compensation and clean references. The manipulated reporting practices were halted. The chief financial officer resigned to pursue other opportunities, which in corporate language often means the fire was real, but the building preferred elegance. And John? John was not redeemed. That is the part stories usually lie about. One confession does not erase years of cowardice. One good act at the end does not make every earlier choice noble. He lost his position. His reputation collapsed in the narrow professional circles where men like him once moved easily. Some people said he was another victim of corporate pressure. Others said he only found his conscience when self-preservation failed. Both were probably true. Months later, Kate ran into him once outside the courthouse downtown after a final filing. Winter light reflected off the stone steps in pale silver. For a moment they just stood there, 2 people linked forever by a room. Neither would ever forget. "You were right," John said. Kate looked at him. "About what?" "That survival can become a habit." He gave a small bitter smile. "And habits," he said, "can look a lot like character." Then he walked away. Kate watched him disappear into the city and felt not victory, but clarity. Because the real lesson had never been about whether a phone could capture the truth. It was about what fear does to people, long before anyone presses record. Some lie because they are greedy. Some because they are cruel, but many lie because they adapt, little by little, compromise by compromise, until the unbearable becomes routine, and the routine becomes identity. They do not wake up one morning and decide to become the villain. They simply decide, again and again, not to be the one who pays first. That is what makes places like Mercer Point dangerous. Not the obvious monsters. The reasonable ones. The polished ones. The ones who can explain every betrayal in language, so calm it almost sounds wise. Kate eventually found work elsewhere, at a smaller firm with less prestige and fewer glass walls. She learned to trust process less and courage more. She learned that legality matters, but legality alone is not morality. A thing can be technically allowed and still cost you dearly. A thing can violate policy and still reveal injustice. And sometimes the law does not arrive like a sword. Sometimes it arrives like a narrow door, opening just enough for someone brave enough to step through. In the end, the question was never only was it legal. The better question was this: when truth becomes dangerous, who benefits from teaching people not to record, not to speak, not to remember? Because silence has always had defenders. Truth rarely does.